Hello, and welcome to the Austin ISD School Finance and Budget 101 webinar. This presentation will give you a broad context of the financial conditions the district faces. Later, you will have the opportunity to participate in a budget prioritization survey, the results of which will help inform the decision-making process as we develop the preliminary budget proposal for the coming school year and years to come. How do we pay for Austin ISD? Funding a school district of 130 schools with over 80,000 students and nearly 12,000 staff is a rather complex task. To help us through the process, we're guided by a few fundamental principles. First and foremost, as a publicly funded entity, we are committed to transparency. This means educating the public about the district's finances and budget priorities in addition to providing ample opportunities to give feedback to help inform the decision-making process. A focus on efficiency becomes increasingly critical in the face of decreasing resources and increasing academic standards set by the state. We prioritize efficiency by evaluating programs and priorities to find creative cost savings and by working to reduce investments in programs that have not produced sufficient results. This ensures that every dollar results in better outcomes for students, because ultimately that is what we are about. Which brings us to the foundation of our process, making sure that wherever our money goes, it is tightly aligned with our mission and vision as outlined in our strategic plan. The 2015 through 2020 strategic plan provides us with focus and direction in the annual budgeting process. It is the result of months of work and genuine consensus building by community members, educators, district administrators, and the Board of Trustees. At its core is our vision to reinvent the urban school experience, along with our foundational beliefs that all students will graduate college, career, and life ready, that we will create an effective, agile, and responsive organization, and that we will create vibrant relationships critical for successful students and schools. Within our strategic plan are our core values. While our core beliefs outline what it is we do, it is our values that guide how we do things. We believe to achieve our vision for reinvention, we must commit ourselves to high expectations for all: the physical, social, and emotional health and safety for every child, equity, diversity and inclusion, creativity, collaboration and innovation, community schools that act as coordinated neighborhood hubs, and developing lifelong learners. As we prepare to make difficult decisions in our budgeting process, we will look to these core values to guide us. How do we know if we are prioritizing investments that are aligned with our strategic goals? This decision-making matrix is a simple tool that can help us answer that question. For any program, initiative, or staffing choice, we must ask ourselves two key questions. How much is it costing us, and what is the effect it's having on students? We can measure student gains with a number of criteria such as grades, attendance, test scores, or behavior, just to name a few. The area we want to be is in the green. That is, initiatives that are costing the district less or about the same as expected and producing high student gains by whatever measure is deemed appropriate in each instance. Those programs or initiatives that fall into the red area, the ones that are costing us a lot and not producing the kinds of gains we'd like to see, are the ones we would want to reconsider. A case can be made for the value of any given program or initiative on a campus. But in lean economic times, we have to consider looking more critically at the relative costs and outcomes. This gets more complicated when we consider that it is difficult to pinpoint which particular program or staff position is actually bringing about the gains. For example, are reading scores going up because of the innovative curriculum, the one-on-one tutoring, or is it a stellar teacher? Let's start to get more specific about our 2018-19 budget. Austin is in a challenging position when it comes to our budget. Our financial forecasts show that we can expect a budget shortfall of about $30 million, meaning that we anticipate bringing in less revenue this coming school year than we spent last year. Furthermore, a similar shortfall can be expected in future years, barring any major changes to Texas school finance law. The goal for the 2018-19 school year is to remain flat, meaning we're trying not to spend any more or less than we did last year. Why not rip the Band-Aid and make the cuts this year? When we take a closer look at just how much $30 million is, it becomes clear that the kinds of trade-offs we are talking about cannot just be made top-down without extensive community and staff engagement. That is why we are starting the conversation now, so that we can start getting creative about cutting costs and maximizing resources so we can work to come to a consensus on the difficult decisions that lie ahead. The feedback we get from you today will inform the 2018-19 budget that the Board of Trustees votes on in June. Then, beginning sometime in the summer, we will start to implement a multi-year budget stabilization plan informed by continued community feedback. You might be asking yourself, how is it that the district has a $30 million shortfall when voters just approved a $1.05 billion bond? The short answer is that the bond is a completely separate pool of money from our annual budget. AISD's normal operating budget, or M&O, is called the normal operating budget because it covers the basic costs to keep the school district running, such as personnel or salaries, utilities like electricity and water and curriculum materials. It does not cover things like new construction or major repairs. So when facilities are on average over 46 years old and many are overcrowded, school districts are required to ask their local voters for permission to sell bonds to pay for things like buildings, major repairs, and technology equipment. This is where investors loan money to a school district with interest for a defined period of time, much like a house mortgage. This is exactly what happened last November when Austin voters overwhelmingly supported the district's investment in our schools. So yes, last November 2017, voters did approve a $1 billion bond to address overcrowding and critical needs, improve technology, and modernize its schools. But this money can only be used as outlined in the bond and cannot be used to cover gaps in our normal operating budget. If you were following the news leading up to the bond election last year, you may have heard that one of the great things about bond funds is that they are not subject to recapture. All the money stays in Austin. Once we understand what that means, we will get to the bottom of why our normal operating budget is constricting. You may be more familiar with the recapture system being referred to as Robin Hood, who was known for stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. It has now become a bit of a misnomer to describe it in this way. Recapture is a law that was initially passed to help support school districts considered property poor, meaning their properties are relatively affordable. Keep in mind, our schools are funded primarily from our property tax dollars, so school districts where properties not valued very highly would have less revenue to fund their schools. In a city like Austin, where property values are skyrocketing, you would think Austin ISD would be flush with cash. But not according to recapture law, which says the state will take a portion of those tax dollars from property-rich districts like Austin and redistribute it to school districts around the state that would otherwise have less funding for their schools. Let's try and get a better sense of the numbers we're talking about. For the 2018-19 school year, for every $1 in local property taxes, Austin will send over 40 cents to the state capitol. In real terms, that's $534 million. Just to give you some context, that's enough money to give every graduating senior a $98,000 scholarship, and it's enough to more than double the salary and benefits of all 5,712 AISD teachers. And it gets worse. By fiscal year 2020, we can expect that 50 cents of every dollar will be sent to the state in recapture. Here you can see the exact figures. If we look back to as recently as 2016, taxpayers paid $923 million, and just under a third of that was sent to the state. In just 3 years' time, we'll be spending over half of our local tax dollars to the state. So while our property tax bills are certainly going up, you can see that year by year, we are getting to keep a smaller percentage of those dollars. You might say that the idea behind recapture is fair. Students in less wealthy districts deserve the same quality education offered in wealthier districts. The problem is that since the law was passed in 1993, no major changes have been made to the formula, even though Austin is clearly a very different city than it was in 1993. If we look at some figures for the student population we serve, we see that 1 in 2 students is economically disadvantaged. 1 in 3 has a first language other than English, and 1 in 10 students are classified as having a learning or other disability. Austin ISD is committed to meeting the diversity of needs of its students by offering things like breakfast in the classroom, dual language programming, small class sizes, and counseling, but these things cost money. That's why it is a bit of a misnomer to refer to recapture as Robin Hood. Austin may be considered property wealthy, but if you keep in mind that much of our property tax revenue comes from commercial properties downtown, we can see how the high values of these properties has little to do with the relative means of the families we serve. Furthermore, not all of the dollars collected in recapture are redistributed to Texas schools. Remember, recapture dollars go to the state's general fund. Once there, it's difficult to track. What we do know is that the state collects more money in recapture than it allocates out. That means that many of the property tax dollars Austinites are paying don't even end up supporting Texas schools, but instead fund other needs throughout the state. To summarize, Austin ISD is the single largest payer of recapture among over 1,022 school districts in Texas. AISD's payment alone equals 25% of all state collections. Between 2017 and 2021, AISD is projected to pay almost $3.1 billion in recapture. By 2019, more than one-half of every M&O tax dollar collected by AISD will go to the state. Aside from recapture, Austin ISD faces a number of other budget pressures that compound the problem. Declining enrollment is another cause of decreasing revenues. We can see that enrollment peaked in the 2011-12 school year and has declined by about 4% since then. Some of the reasons for this are that many families can no longer afford to live in Austin. On top of that, Austin is experiencing a declining birth rate, increased competition from charter schools. While you might think that it costs less to educate fewer students, students to not leave the district in neat units of 22 and under-enrolled schools cost the district more per pupil. At the same time, Title I federal funding has seen significant decreases due to changes at the federal level and decreases in the number of economically disadvantaged students in Austin ISD. Despite the tightening of our budget, Austin ISD has managed to keep its spending relatively flat despite the ongoing pressures of our budget, such as inflation in the cost of health care, utilities, fuel, and software. As you can see, over 86% of Austin ISD's budget after recapture goes to staff salaries. With an annual budget of around $788 million, that leaves just over $100 million to cover the rest of our expenses. $30 million would cut pretty deeply into that $100 million, so you can see how it would be quite the challenge to keep the deficit from impacting staff and salaries. Something else to keep in mind is that when we talk about cutting programs, the fact is that the vast majority of programs are supported by staff, so most any conversation about cuts have a human impact. Now that we understand where we are at financially and why, let's start to wrap our heads around the reality of a $30 million deficit. The red bar represents our target of a $30 million reduction in spending. The green bar is the total Title I funding Austin ISD receives. Sometimes it's easy to think, well, the district needs to clean house over its central office. Here you can see that the total of all central office administrative staff comes to just over $17 million. Even if we eliminated all those positions, we're barely halfway to our target. Often people suggest we just need to green our schools, just turn the lights off and stop running the AC. Unfortunately, no amount of energy savings is going to get us near our target. The total of all energy expenditures in AISD, including water, electricity, and gas, comes to just over $25 million. And finally, folks often suggest that we just start renting out our facilities when not in use. Right now, the district brings in about $1.6 million from renting facilities. So even if we were to double or even quadruple that number, we'd still be barely making a dent in the deficit. So what's next? Moving forward, share your knowledge with other parents, colleagues, and community members and stay informed. And of course, register to vote and participate. The laws that govern Austin ISD finances are largely decided in the Texas legislature.